Guys, I have a confession to make. I have been no stranger to calling out the Resident Evil 4 remake and being skeptical about whether it's the right time for it. And while I still do hold the same points, and I think some other Resident Evil games deserved a remake first, I can't sit here and tell you with a straight face that I didn't smile during the new trailers. Just to give you guys some background, I have been a fan of Resident Evil ever since I was a kid, and 4 was actually the first one I played back in 2007. I remember back then, I would watch my brother play this on the PS2, and every now and then, he would let me hop on, and I had an absolute blast playing it, even though I was just a kid. As I got new consoles, I would always make sure to get a copy of this game, and I played the living shit out of Resident Evil 4 on the Wii, which felt like cheating compared to the PS2 with the motion controls, and the PC. So I've been a fan of this game for a long time. I'll be honest with you, I was pretty worried when I first clicked on the trailer on Thursday. I thought about how they could possibly revamp a perfect game, but after seeing how true they are staying to the original while adding new mechanics, I gotta say, I'm pleased. I really do appreciate how they are adapting this classic to suit modern times while also paying attention to the original soul to maintain the identity. Guys, I will go on record now to finally say that I think the Resident Evil 4 remake will be amazing, and I hope to God that I don't have to choke on my words when this game releases in the spring. So without any further ado, let's talk about how the Resident Evil 4 remake will be perfect. Capcom blessed us with 2 Resident Evil 4 remake trailers on Thursday. One was dedicated to showing off the gameplay, while the other was for the story. Both of these trailers were amazing, but let's talk about the gameplay one first. The trailer opens and it becomes very clear that this is different than the original Resident Evil 4 that we all love. The first clear distinction is that this gameplay is happening during the night. The original game opened during the day, and the landscape is also much denser with trees, and the space doesn't feel nearly as open in this remake, which adds a much more claustrophobic and foreboding mood to the game. The next thing is a much more subtle detail, but it's worth examining. In the gameplay trailer, Leon walks around and says,
"How far could he have gone?"
What this implies is that Leon is in the village looking for someone, presumably the cab driver or someone else. It obviously can't be Ashley because he says the pronoun he. This is a different opening from the base game that just has Leon enter a stranger's house and ask if he has seen Ashley. This original opening to the game is awkward when you think about it because who barges into a stranger's house and asks if they know someone? This slight change in narrative is actually cool to see because it shows that they are ironing out the awkward moments from the previous game to fit a much more reasonable scenario. We also see Leon enter a basement in the first building, which is a new change because in the base game, there was no basement in this building. These are small changes, but there will definitely be much bigger changes that we will see when the game launches. The next aspect that I really like from this gameplay trailer are the graphics. This game is absolutely beautiful to look at, and while a few months ago I was worried about there being too much color, it honestly seems like they got it just right. This game looks beautiful, but it still has that dark undertone to it that the base game had. This game looks incredible, and it's nice to see some of the locations we were familiar with get awesome makeovers. Since we're talking about the gameplay trailer, it would be a crime not to talk about the gameplay. The gameplay seems extremely similar to the RE2 remake with the shooting and the aiming systems, but it also has the Resident Evil 4 flair with the kicks that Leon would do, and you can kick barrels now, which is actually pretty cool. We also have the classic strangles that the Ganados would do on Leon. It was a bit weird to see Leon in this game running around and shooting, just because I'm so used to the original game where Leon was stationary while he shot, but overall the gameplay looks amazing. We have some new things like destructible environments, which seems like the remake's way of adding Levolution to the mix to keep things interesting. We also have a brand new parrying system. I just hope they make it difficult to parry so that it can have some skill expression, but I really look forward to this new change. We also have the weapon wheel in the game now, which is expected given that it's been in every other newer Resident Evil. But with these new changes, we also have elements we are familiar with, like the attaché case, that we all loved as a fun minigame to find the proper way to organize our inventories. There's also a new crafting system, similar to the ones we've gotten in newer Resident Evils, and I think it fits in perfectly with this remake. We also have the merchant coming back, which isn't a surprise because he was a fan favorite, but with him comes the shop system and the treasures around the map, and I always thought this was a fun side activity in the base game, so I'm happy they're bringing it back. Overall, the gameplay in this remake seems to find a way to integrate the old with the new, and I'm all for it. Now let's move on to the story trailer we got, and I gotta say, my takeaways are essentially the same. This trailer focused a lot more on the narrative, and it definitely feels like this version of Resident Evil 4 is going to hammer in on the cult aspect a lot more. I really like this because in the base game, the cult feels a little underexplained, and the reason why Ashley is kidnapped in the original just feels kinda stupid. She's kidnapped to be held for ransom, then simultaneously injected with Las Plagas. That just feels kinda purposeless, and not as fleshed out as it could be. From what we've seen in the trailer, I'm getting the vibe that Ashley is meant as a sacrifice for some sort of ritual, which honestly I jive with a lot more as a story than the original's explanation. There are also some cool moments in the trailer, like this collapsing of the bridge, which goes back to some Levolution. We also have a giant skull here in this dining room that is probably the skull of an Elegante. We also got to see a lot more of our favorite bosses, like the Big Cheese and the Del Lago, but what's interesting is how these bosses definitely seem a lot scarier than their original counterparts, and it's not just because these iterations are newer. These new bosses seem to be a lot darker in their color palette, and they overall have more unsettling designs. I mean, just look at Salazar. He doesn't look like an albino child dressing up as George Washington anymore. He looks like a small vampire from the 18th century, but his face shape is definitely scarier than before. I feel like this philosophy can be applied to the entire game, as it's meant to be a scarier experience, whereas the original Resident Evil 4 felt like it was going more for an action feel. Another interesting thing I want to point out is how none of the trailers so far have shown us later parts of the game. If you remember Resident Evil 4's structure, then you will probably recall that the game was divided into 3 sections: the village, the castle, and the military island. All of the bosses that I just talked about came from the first 2/3 of the game. You have Dr. Salvador, the Del Lago, El Gigante, and the Big Cheese, who all tie to the village part of the game. Then you have Salazar and the Verdugos, who make up the next third of the game, which happens in the castle. But the last third, which is the military island, has yet to be shown in the trailers. The military island has some cool bosses, like the Regenerators, U3, and Krauser. But I think I speak for all of us when I say that this was the weakest section as a whole for the game. I mean, when we think back to Resident Evil 4, most of us think about the castle and the village, and besides those bosses I mentioned for the military island, the setting is pretty forgettable. But the fact that they haven't shown it at all makes me question whether it's in the remake. Of course it could still be there, but not be shown because they don't want to show the last section of the game, which makes perfect sense. But it's boring not to speculate, so what if it's not in the trailer because it didn't get included in the game? My genuine question to you guys is, would you be happy with this change? If they found a way to incorporate these bosses into the castle, for example, and then expand on that section, would that upset you? I, for one, wouldn't mind some Regenerators in the castle, but personally, I would be fine with them massively overhauling the military island to make it a much more memorable and distinct location than it was, but if they got it, I can live with that. I just hope they find a way to save those bosses from the military section that I mentioned, like the Regenerators, U3, and Krauser, and I'm sure they will, because those were some of the best bosses in the game. If I'm taking a guess, I think they probably kept the military island section because they learned from the RE3 remake that not having cut content is better than having cut content. But I just hope they find a way to repurpose the setting to fit the more horror-based approach of the remake as opposed to the all-out action Rambo shenanigans that happens in the base game. So let's just hope and pray they massively overhauled this section, because honestly, I do see a lot of potential in it. But overall guys, the Resident Evil 4 Remake seems like a fantastic addition to the reboots we have been getting. I feel like a lot of the fans who were skeptical before, like me, feel a lot more comfort now after seeing these new trailers. The remake, from what we have seen so far, seems to have the soul of Resident Evil 4 while adding in a modern horror approach, and I can't wait to finally play this game. Hopefully I can get a new computer by the time this game launches, because my current PC can't even run Resident Evil Village, but that's just a me problem. The story seems to have some changes and touch-ups, which I think are seriously going to help with the flow in this game feeling natural, and the graphics also look beautiful. Now, is this game going to have the same legacy as the original Resident Evil 4? Obviously not. Resident Evil 4 came in and created a whole new genre of games with over-the-shoulder shooters. The remake is obviously not going to be nearly as revolutionary as the original, but does it matter? It's still likely going to be a great game, and I think all of us are counting the days until we get our hands on this game. One thing I will say though, to those people who have not played the original Resident Evil 4, play it. The game is still amazing, and it holds up a lot better than the other early Resident Evils. Probably because it came out on newer consoles, and it created a shift in the genre with its new perspective, but it's truly a game that everyone should play. Resident Evil 4 is a game worth playing, not just for the fun of it, but for the brilliance in level design, pacing, and the innovations that this game had. But that's just my spiel, since I'm a diehard fan. Let's just hope that this remake gets it right, and every sign so far seems to be pointing in the right direction. But guys, mark my words, this remake is going to be one to remember. That's all I have for this video. Please let me know your thoughts over the RE4 remake in the comments below, and if you're skeptical or disagree with me, then please let me know. I love reading through what you guys have to say, and I'm not just saying this to pump the algorithm, although that's pretty nice too. But guys, I'm a small channel, so all the love and support you guys provide really does mean a lot to me. And if you made it this far, thank you, I love you, and I genuinely hope that you have a great rest of your day.